Dear colleagues, let's continue our conference. And now I would like to introduce our next panel. This panel is dedicated to the topic of culture, and I'm sure this conversation will be an interesting one as well. The topic for this panel is culture during war and beyond, challenges, strategies, and prospects. This panel will be chaired by Jennifer Seldstein, professor of music department at Jacobs School of Music, Indiana University. And now I would like to give the floor to Jennifer. Jennifer, are you with us?
I see Jennifer here, but she's muted. Jennifer, can you hear us?
Thank you very much. Our first speaker, who I'll introduce today, is Andrei Kislyuk. Has been a postgraduate student at the Department of Musicology, Folklore, and Ethnology at the Institute of Art History, Folklore, and Ethnology of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, specializing in cultural studies. His research interests include Ukrainian piano music, musical biography, minimalism in music, and microtonal music. Kislyuk is a trained concert pianist, sound engineer, and music theorist. His presentation today is titled Ukrainian Music Born by War. Please join me in welcoming him.
Andrei, are you ready to present?
Yes, I'm ready. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I would like to thank Indiana University and our American colleagues for your steadfast support of Ukraine and Ukrainian scholars. We appreciate it a lot. My speech today will be dedicated to the topic of Ukrainian music born by the war. And I will tell you about those pieces that were composed during the wartime and that are dedicated to the topic of the war. Let me share my screen now. Can you see my presentation?
We can see it, but I wonder
Yes.
if we could make it full screen.
Just a second. I don't know how to make it full screen. F5 or slideshow. Just click on the slideshow. Among the studies on classical music during the war, I would like to highlight the following pieces. Arthur Cozy's study musicians and their art during war, supported by the Institute for Cultural Strategy. This research is based on a 2024 survey of 100 Ukrainian classical musicians, and it explores their perspectives on creativity in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Then there was another survey, another study, Marina Hordienko's study that is called Classics During War, the Ukrainian Music Scene from 2022. It was published in Critical Journal in December 2024. This study analyzes the classical music concert programs of the National Philharmonic of Ukraine, the National House of Music in Kyiv, and the Miroslav Skoryk Lviv National Philharmonic, comparing two concert seasons, 2021 and 2023-2024. We cannot see your presentation. Well, the slides are not changed. We are still on the first slide. Well, that's intentional. Can you see my slide now? No, we are still on the first slide. Ukrainian music born by war.
How about now? Can you see a different slide? We can see your presentation, but we're not sure whether you'll be able to switch to the next slide. So we're still stuck on your slide number 1. Wanted to cover is that the first steps towards collecting and understanding the material demonstrated that the academic orchestral music of Ukrainian composers related to the theme of Russia's criminal war against Ukraine in the genres of symphony, opera, and cantata can be conditionally described as classical music, contemporary art, and a synthesis of arts. Classical music includes the hymn Requiem, City of Mary, and the symphony Victorious by Zoltan Almasha, and the orchestral work Bucha Lacrimosa by Victoria Poliva. Contemporary art, in which the core idea is conceptual and incorporates a combination of forms and means, such as collage, installation, performance, or digital technologies, is represented by the opera Gaia 24, Opera del Mundo, and the instrumental piece for Bandura and Dulcimer Mariupol by the composer tandem of Roman Grigoriev and Ilya Razumeiko. I have provided the links where you can listen to Mary City and Bucha Lacrimosa, and the trailer for the opera Gaia 24 will be shared in the chat box. The synthesis of arts is a combination of music and painting, music and poetry, music and theater to depict military themes. Is demonstrated by the project Artistic Weapon of Victory of Ukrainian female artists, supported by the Ukrainian Cultural Fund. It was implemented on August 25, 2024 at the Odessa Regional Philharmonic as a part of the festival 2 Days and 2 Nights of New Music. The project featured music by Alla Zahaikevich, Anna Kopyka, Kira Maidenberg-Todorova, Carmela Tsepkolenko, Asmati Chibalashvili, and poetry by Lina Kostenko, Oksana Zabushko, Iya Kiva, Valeria Zhihalina, and Yulia Dmitrenko Despotashvili. A synthesis of music by Asmati Chibalashvili and video projections of abstract acrylic paintings by Odessa artist Volodymyr Mukhin was presented in the audiovisual performance titled 7 Basic Emotions During War, dated 2024, using a prepared piano. And this performance recreated the 7 basic emotions: fear, anger, joy, sadness, grief, contempt, disgust, and surprise, as proposed by American psychologist Paul Ekman. All these pieces were created with the aim of preserving the memory of the war, heroes and victims for future generations of Ukrainians, as well as strengthening the spirit of those currently fighting, as well as to support global cultural diplomacy, to convey information about Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine to the world in a language of art that resonates with people far removed from the realities of war. Here's how the composers themselves speak about it. Let me start with Zoltan Almashi. Here's his quote. I wrote in the score that it is dedicated to Mariupol, and this is already recorded. I'm almost sure that in 10 to 20 years, the average European will forget about it, but he will open my sheet music, see the inscription, and start asking questions. This is memory, and in this, I see the meaning of culture. Next are the composers that I also wanted to quote, Roman Grigoriev and Ilya Arzumenko. Now, it is important to talk about contemporary art, contemporary theater, contemporary opera, because these concerns both cultural diplomacy and the development of society in general. This is perhaps the most important tool for building our future, our nation. Contemporary art, contemporary opera is what distinguishes us from the orcs. Such a culture is impossible there, but we do it. Next, I would like to delve more into different pieces. A well-known cello player, Zoltan Almashi, at the beginning of the full-scale war, was experiencing creative stagnation. However, when Oksana Linev offered him a commission, he began composing. Initially, the working title was Adagio, but as Mariupol was being destroyed, Almashi's composition evolved into the hymn Requiem City of Mary for string orchestra. Almashi emphasizes that the title and dedication carry more weight than the music itself. City of Mary is not music, it is war. And the piece performs the function of a weapon. This piece is around 8 to 9 minutes, though Almashi worked on it for an extended period. It premiered on June 20, 2023 in Graz. The piece has since been performed in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Lviv, and Vinnytsia. For example, in Kyiv, the piece was performed on February 24, 2023 at the Mykola Lysenko Column Hall of the National Philharmonic of Ukraine. And in Vinnytsia, it was adapted for organ by Georgy Kurkov. At the Kyiv Music Fest in 2024, the work was rearranged for Dahmer's orchestra. In Toronto, in Canada, it was performed by the Toronto Symphony Orchestra under the baton of Oksana Linev. Musically, City of Mary transitions from an almost romantic melody to the destructive dissonance of war, freezing on a high violin note that symbolizes the stasis of life in the devastated city. It concludes with haunting, wounded sounds that evoke the memory of the pre-war city. Victoria Polova, contemporary Ukrainian composer in the early days of Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine, was in her Kyiv apartment, composing music amidst the sounds of explosions. She completed her orchestral work on July 8, 2022. That same year, on August 29, it premiered, titled Bucha Lacrimosa at Beethoven Festival in Bonn, performed by the Youth Symphony Orchestra of Ukraine under the baton of Oksana Linev. On April 25, 2023, this piece was performed in Bucha at the Church of the Holy Apostle, the first cult by the Latushinsky Chapel of the National House of Music during a memorial concert dedicated to the victims of Russia's war crimes against Ukraine. The composer explained, and this work was written after I saw photographs of the terrible atrocities committed in Bucha. Then I almost burned out from despair, from the inability to live on. This is a contemplation of how the souls of tortured, raped, shot Ukrainians rise to the sky like streams. And this is evidence of the loss of the paradise by humanity. This will forever remain a terrible wound. And this work is the only chance for me to survive. The ashes of Bucha are knocking on my heart. The composer tandem of Ilya Razumik and Roman Frihariev works in the style of contemporary art. The young authors are not only creating music, but also libretto, direction, scenography, philosophical concepts to create unique opera performances. Their opera Gaia 24, Opera del Mondo, tells the story of the devastating consequences of the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam by the Russian occupiers on June 6, 2023. Their resume originally comes from Zaporizhia. That is why the authors felt a deep obligation to share the tragedy of Kakhovka with the world, especially convenient Europeans. And they tried to represent it using the combination of theme of earth and water. The opera draws inspiration from Gaia, the Greek goddess of earth, as well as the modern views of French philosopher and anthropologist Bruno Latour. In 2022, just before his death, Latour published a text titled "Is the Soul of Europe Changing Under Our Feet?" in which he discussed the relationship between a human and nature amidst the war. The composers used this image since the topic about Earth is a global topic. And that is why they were trying to scale the Ukrainian tragedy. The genre of Opera del Mondo is inspired by the installation by Aldo Rosso, and his installation titled Teatro del Mondo, a Florentine theater created for the Venice Biennale in 1980. The opera lasts about 90 minutes and brings together transformed landscapes, the human body, and the theater stage into an open musical and theatrical ritual. It is divided into 3 parts, each flowing seamlessly into the next. And the first one is titled Son of Mother Earth. And this one features ethnic music from various cultures of the world. The second one, titled Cabaret Metastasis, includes scenes that emphasize the plasticity of the naked human body. Now the third one, titled Dances to Mother Earth, blends various musical genres, ranging from rap to folk songs. The composers explain. The opera is based on extreme contrasts. This is a study of the voice, a study of the body, a study of the earth. The musical language in the opera is the language of the earth of the Russian-Ukrainian war. While there is no classical symphonic music in its traditional form and sound, transformed versions of it are present. There is also death metal, pop, rap, operetta, noise, Ukrainian song, and even Agnus Dei. In the first part, many of the songs are accompanied by magical ritual dances. The musical and choreographic elements evolve with the inclusion of collages and electronic music, alongside documentary video footage filmed in Hortitsa Island during an October 2023 expedition. This is a performance that includes a floating piano and cracks in the ground. The composers explain their concept in the following way. For us, every opera is a study, and the expedition forms part of this study, part of the multimedia language that we use in the performance to expand the stage space. In modern theater, we do not need narrow profile artists who don't understand the plot or the purpose of their actions. We need universal artists, and each of artists must be a co-creator of this opera. Everyone needs to contribute to the creation of it. The premiere took place on May 10, 2024 at the International Center for Culture and Arts on the Alley of the Heroes of the Heavenly Hundred. This was followed by a European tour, including performances at the May International Festival of Opera and Music in Rotterdam, Vienna in September, and a special presentation on October 26,
Excuse me,
2024.
Andre, I'm so sorry. We have more people to present. Could you please wrap it up? Thank you.
I'm so sorry, but I'm almost done. I'm almost done. Thank you for your attention. And a short text, it is possible to cover only a tiny part of the modern musical space of Ukraine, but it is important that Ukrainian music be visible in the world. This is it from my side. Thank you so much for your attention. And sorry for taking more time than you have allotted to me.
No, thank you so much for that wonderful paper. And we will save questions, and because we have a discussant for the end. Our next speaker is Dr. Asmati Shibayashvili, who is a composer and researcher specializing in contemporary music and interdisciplinary art. She currently serves as Deputy Director for Scientific Affairs at the Modern Art Research Institute of the National Academy of Arts in Ukraine. And her remarks today are titled Rethinking the Functions of Art in the Context of Social Crises. Please join me in welcoming Asmati.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I would like to thank organizers for inviting me to participate in this conference. Let me start sharing my screen now. I hope you can see it full screen. Yes. That's great. Throughout the 20th and the early 21st century, humanity has repeatedly faced large-scale social, political, and environmental crises that have radically altered sociocultural paradigms. Recent global challenges, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, have yet again demonstrated the ability of art to quickly adapt and rethink its strategies in extreme conditions. While the pandemic accelerated digitalization and shift of artistic practices into virtual spaces, the war has brought about deeper, more systemic changes, highlighting art's potential to not only reflect social processes but also act as a negative agent in their transformation. The purpose of my presentation is to identify and analyze the main functions of art, which were especially clearly manifested in the Ukrainian artistic space after the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia. The positions of Jürgen Habermas, Doris Sommer, and Boris Groys play an important role among the theoretical approaches to understanding the role of art in conditions of social crisis. According to Habermas, art is striving to reconcile modernity with its internal contradictions, and it should transform common forms of life and not simply influence the individual. And according to Doris Sommer, the active role of the artist as a provocateur of social change through aesthetic innovations are important. Boris Groys notes the ability of art to go beyond aesthetics, turning it into a powerful means of political communication. Considering all of the above, let us trace how they implemented it all to practice. I would like to mention a number of documentary films. For instance, the project that is called War Up Close. This is the project that utilizes VR technologies and the circular photo panoramas to capture the aftermath of the invasion in Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages, presenting these experiences in virtual exhibitions for an international audience. These projects demonstrate the art during times of conflict, and they serve as a means to record and communicate traumatic experiences. Some of projects could be mentioned, for instance, Fresh Memories, The Look by Andrzej Morawicz and Volodymyr Kalbasa, and 20 Days in Mariupol by Mstislav Chernov. In addition to direct documentation, the artistic interpretation of events is important. In this context, works of art acquire symbolic meaning, becoming entrenched in the collective consciousness and becoming part of the cultural discourse. There is a tendency to use documentary materials in works of video art when artists abandon purely allegorical or symbolic forms in favor of maximum authenticity. In Ukrainian Golgotha by Oksana Chepeluk, the footage of the war is combined with self-portraits expressing an emotional cry. The slideshow montage is accompanied by the author's audio commentary and statistics of victims in Mariupol, Bucha, Irpin, and Izum. In video diptych Ecocide, the artist addresses the topic of the destruction of Kakhovka Dam. Significant artistic symbols of the early days of the war were created by Ukrainian artist Nikita Titov, whose works can be viewed as a kind of archive of the war. His posters, shared on social media, became an immediate artistic response to key events. One of the most popular in his posters published published on Facebook on the 26th of February 2022 is depicting a Russian warship and evokes the historical defense of Zmyiny Island by the Ukrainian military. This poster actually became prophetic as the Ukrainian Navy sank the cruiser Moskva on the 14th of April 2022. And we see that and art not only captures dramatic moments, but also creates iconic symbols that become markers of the war's history. Another important function of art is the consolidation of society around the affirmations of national identity. This occurs through the actualization and rethinking of traditional cultural images and symbols. This function has been especially evident in the times of existential threats, when art became a tool for unification and the formation of a clear sense of national self-determination and self-affirmation. The war confronting society with the urgent need for mobilization has intensified the desire of artists and researchers to turn to Ukrainian folk culture and historical symbols as sources of strength. From the first days of war, Ukrainian folk, insurgent, and rifleman songs experienced a true revival, becoming powerful symbols of unity and resistance. A vivid example of this is the performance of the song "Oh, the Red Viburnum in the Meadow" by Andriy Khlevnyuk, which gained significant public and international fame, demonstrating how traditional art can acquire new modern meanings. The restoration and popularization of Crimean Tatar musical folklore is embodied in Jamala's album Kirim. Another example is Perich and Batich and their album Zamordovany Podzwin Pershий. In visual art, traditional symbols have also acquired new meanings. In the series Ukrainian Harvest 2022, Maria Sharlai combines folk symbolism with AI technologies. The images of agricultural crops create surreal scenes that are reminiscent of explosions. Thus, art in times of crisis not only preserves identity but also transforms this identity to address modern challenges, serving as a tool for social cohesion and the affirmation of cultural authenticity. Another important function of art in wartime is its role as a form of social resistance, a powerful tool for criticizing violence, injustice, and human rights violations. Through the artistic reflection of complex political and social realities, art can mobilize the community, foster solidarity, and affirm a civic stance. One example of artistic resistance is the project Ukrainian Female Artists with Their Weapons, initiated by Carmela and Kolenko, and actually five composers and poets joined the project, creating a cycle of chamber cantatas united by the theme of war. The combination of music, poetry, and performative elements allowed the creators not only to reflect the tragic events, but also to express the collective emotions of resistance, solidarity, and invincibility. Thus, art in times of war becomes not just an emotional reaction, but also a response to the threat. It mobilizes the community, builds solidarity, and serves as an active form of civil resistance, capable of criticizing violence and injustice. An important aspect of artistic resistance is adaptation to crisis conditions, where both the space and the means of artistic expression change. Notable example is the album Renaissance by Roman Grigoriev, where the frame of a hurricane cluster shell becomes a musical instrument, transforming a symbol of destruction into one of resistance and understanding of war through sound. Thus, in times of war, art adapts its forms of expression and spaces, turning tools of destruction into symbols of resistance and invincibility. It is also worth mentioning Ernest Schoenberg's Mon opera Waiting, which was created in the shelter of Odessa Opera Theatre. Another important function of art is its ability to serve as a tool for cultural diplomacy. A striking example is the Artists Support Ukraine project launched by the NGO Port Agency. This initiative not only supports artists displaced from occupied territories, but also distributes artwork in ready-to-print format. Over the past 3 years, the project has organized more than 40 exhibitions in 20 countries, featuring the work of over 100 artists. On the 1st of March 2022, the international audiovisual project Peace Letters to Ukraine, initiated by the new Museum of Networked Art, was launched. Over 250 artists from various countries participated in the project. The goal of the project was to support Ukrainian artists while also protecting freedom of speech, creativity, and self expression as the foundation of the personal liberty. Another important function of art is its therapeutic role. In this context, works of art become tools for reflection, helping to process and understand traumatic experiences at both collective and individual levels. A notable example of this function is Diary of the Occupation by Mikhailo Rai, an artist who survived 9-month Russian occupation of Kherson. On this slide, you see his first work, The Cascade, and you see that the storyteller, and it is dated the 24th of February 2022. Another example of the therapeutic function of art is the audiovisual performance Seven Basic Emotions During War by Chivalashvili. It is created for two performance and a piano. This project allows the viewer to experience the emotions that a person undergoes during crisis situations. In a destructive context, art can serve as a tool for propaganda and ideological manipulation. Russia's current war against Ukraine has revealed both sides of this phenomenon. On one hand, Ukrainian artists are using art for resistance and identity protection, while on the other hand, Russian culture is actively employed to promote imperial narratives. And there are examples of appropriation of by Russian propaganda Ukrainian songs. For instance, a duckling swims in the Tisa River. Thus, Russian art and its officially supported forms does not merely function as a cultural domain, but as a key component of hybrid warfare. It is used as a means of ideological influence, legitimizing aggression, and devaluing the national identity of other people and shaping the image of the enemy. Consequently, art can both contribute to overcoming a crisis and serve as a tool for manipulation. The functions of art are not isolated. They could interact with other functions. The examples of Ukrainian modern practices demonstrate that art is not only a reflection of events, but also an active interpreter, critic, and agent of social transformation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asmati. Our next speaker is Dr. Hannah Shamaris, who is Associate Professor and Head of the Design Department at Zaporizhia National University. She spent the last 12 years working in higher education, as has been a member of the Ukraine Union of Designers since January 2018. Shamaris specializes in design education, digital technologies, 3D modeling, and immersive technologies like AR, VR. She holds advanced degrees in design and informatics, and her PhD dissertation explored the formation of graphic competence in computer science students. As a member of the Union of Designers of Ukraine, Shamaris actively engages in educational program development and international collaborations. She has authored over 60 publications, including works indexed in Scopus and Web of Science, and serves on editorial boards of several international journals. Her presentation today is titled Prospects for Integrating Practices of Inclusive Design into the Training of Future Designers in Ukraine. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good afternoon. Thank you for introductory remarks and thank you for introducing my presentation. I would like to warn you right away. I am in Zaporizhia now, and the air raid alert has been on for 2 hours already. Therefore, I hope that there will be no airstrikes anywhere around me, but please be patient if you hear the sounds of explosions or if I get disconnected. Unfortunately, I will not be able to continue my presentation. Today, I would like to present the piece that is dedicated to the inclusive design. And thank you for the introduction. Yes, I am an associate professor at the design department, and I am the head of that department. And that is the department where I present the results of my research work. We have heard a lot today, and we have heard a lot about artistic work and about support. But my research is actually future oriented. As in my work, I try to train designers, those who will be designing the products that will be usable and user-friendly for everyone. And I believe that that would be very important in the wake of recovery of Ukraine. My today's presentation will be dedicated to the results of the research that I conducted. Well, just a couple of introductory remarks. Due to physiology, the human eye can perceive from 100 and in rare cases up to 100 million colors. But there are some limits to it. There are people who have certain impairments and they have to adjust to the conditions that surround them. According to the estimates of the World Health Organization, as of 2023, approximately 1.3 billion people, or 16% of the world's population, have disability, significant disability, including color blindness. Color blindness can cause discomfort while choosing a profession or while seeking employment, establishing relationship, or making decisions in your daily life. According to statistics of a colorblind people population as of 2022, there are more than 350 million colorblind people in the world, and this number is growing every year. That is why there is a need for universal design and inclusive design, since we need to take into consideration the physiological, ergonomics, aesthetics, and other needs in order to solve the current problems of our time. It is worth mentioning that color blindness is usually genetic, but sometimes it is the condition that emerges during your lifetime, for instance, due to an eye injury. Therefore, we believe that inclusive design should be introduced into training of designers. Designers could focus on ergonomic design, which would be convenient and comfortable for the use of everyone. If we use this approach, it allows us to create a new generation of designers who take into account the principles of inclusiveness in their work and contribute to the construction of a universal society. And it helps us to have the new generation of designers. We can build this universal society where every person has the opportunity to use products and services regardless of individual characteristics. And this could be a catalyst not only for the students in terms of acquiring proper professional technical skills, but also it helps us in bringing to the surface the questions and issues of equality and tolerance. Having analyzed 41 articles published, having analyzed 81 articles published in the leading journals abstracted by the Scopus database, and those are the articles dedicated to inclusive design, and we encountered the following indicators. Well, out of 81 articles, 22 articles were dedicated to an environmental design. One graphic design, 15 application and interface design, 6 design education, and practical design, 11 articles. Thus, this analysis showed that the articles dedicated to design education overwhelmingly cover approaches to the modernization of environmental design education. At the same time, the modernization of graphic design and interface design has not been adequately covered despite its significant representation in the field of professional practice. And therefore, there is an urgency of integrating inclusive design practices into the training of future design. And it has to be human-centered. This approach has to be human-centered. This topic is highly relevant. And that is why we suggest to introduce the course or the component of the course that is called Universal Design. I would like to show you the results of this project, the implementation of universal design elements into the training of graphic design students. This is for master degree students, as this master's program is aimed at training not only practical designers, practitioners, but also theoretical designers.
To solve the problem of color accessibility for designers, there is a need to develop a manual. Therefore, I would like to show you the results of the project of the master student Victoria Barabash, which was carried out under my supervision and was devoted to the development of a manual for graphic designers, which in a concise, accessible, and modern form will provide basic information for good and inclusive practices in graphic design. To this end, Victoria and I conducted a peer review, analyzing developments on various violations and different ways of creating manuals. Several samples were analyzed. In particular, the development of designer Khaled Abdulaziz, who designed a manual on color science with a thorough theoretical and visual content. The manual tells about the peculiarities of color combinations, psychology, and principles of their use and design. Each page is dedicated to one of the topics of color science with the addition of visualization for better learning. However, the issue of color blindness was left out of the developer's attention. Also, we analyzed the color magazine titled Prism, which also focuses exclusively on the fundamental theory of color, leaving aside the issue of color blindness. Next, we focused on a manual for parents that was not dedicated to color, but rather about other types of inclusion. It was a manual for parents of children with dyslexia designed by Doha Fatih, a designer, aimed at teaching non-dyslexic people how to understand the thinking of a child with a reading disorder and to emphasize the significance of the condition and the importance of understanding it. This edition fully covered the peculiarities of inclusion of this condition. And of course, I'm sharing the QR code, which you can scan to take a look at this manual. So based on the results of the analysis of analogs and prototypes, we did not find any instructional materials for designers that explained the aspects of color blindness to take them into account in design, which made it important to develop a color vision manual. So now I would like to show you a few slides that are dedicated to this manual. First, let us look at them. Like virtually, we are imagining that we're flipping through the pages. Using the manual as a supportive tool in educational and practical activities, designers will be able to better understand the structure of color science, classification, and peculiarities of visual perception. Take into account color peculiarities. Take into account color peculiarities in their own design projects. So the first pages of the manual are devoted to trichromacy, normal vision. This is a type of three-color perception in which a person has three types of color photoreceptors that perceive red, green, and blue to distinguish the visible spectrum. A person with three-color vision can distinguish between most permanent color, the saturation, lightness, contrast, color vibration, etc. The pages of the manual devoted to this color vision demonstrate most of the necessary materials for familiarization and operation, a color wheel of 6, 12, and 25 colors, divided in half into cool and warm shades, with the definition of the degrees of each tone. That is titled HSV model. On the color spectrum and the addition of color names marked with the first letters for convenience. RGB, CMYK color overlay models, HSV chromatic gradation, and opacity calibration. The following pages of the manual are devoted to color blindness, a genetic or rarely acquired disability that is accompanied by an inability to perceive certain colors or their complete absence. There are different forms of color perception: trichromacy, tetrachromacy, dichromacy, monochromacy, and achromatopsia. And we have summarized the information on them and visualized the information about them in the form of a color perception chart for the introductory part of the manual. The color perception chart is the product of a thorough analysis of color perception peculiarities and the transfer of data to RGB derivatives with a brief and concise description of each form of dichromatism. The principle of constructing the graph of color perception was based on the following: analysis of the peculiarities of color spectrum perception, modern approaches to the classification of color perception forms, and information design, study of manual analogs, and identification of the lack of visualization of color blindness forms in the form of graphs and diagrams for a deep understanding of basic terminology. The graph values are presented using symbols, where on the left we have symbols for identifying color blindness and the values for depicting photoreceptors in the form of the RGB model. On the right is the condition for obtaining color infographics, the value of the maximum luminance available to the human eye. And the features of color vision forms are shown by guides to the text blocks with description of the condition, and accordingly by attaching visualization of change in the color spectrum dependent on the color perception anomaly. The descriptions also contain short mathematical notes to indicate the activation of certain photoreceptors of the RGB model. Trichromacy, color vision, the same perception of all three types of cones. Tanopia, as a low perception of blue, yellow, red, violet colors. Agiteranopia, red less than green and more than blue. Partial color blindness, low perception of green shades. Protanopia, R is more than green and more than blue. Basically, we're talking about low perception of blonde waves, red, yellow, and green colors. Monochrome, equal RGB, low color saturation and reduced contrast. Now, the next section is dedicated to dichromacy. And it demonstrates a visual representation of it and a comparison of color vision data in graphic and visual forms. The graphic symbols define
Hannah,
photoreceptors,
Hannah.
RGB tones.
Hannah, I'm so sorry. Could you please try and wrap up? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So now I am gonna move closer to the end of my presentation. As the analysis of the peculiarities of color vision allowed us to use the theoretical material in the development of the color vision manual spectrum of vision, the design of which is defined as an integral attempt to expand knowledge about color and the peculiarities of color spectrum perception by different forms of color blindness, which in its turn will provide an opportunity to promote the further development of inclusive education that takes into account the peculiarities of color vision and design, and can also serve as a useful tool for designers and their educational professional activities, as well as an aid. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thanks so much to Hannah. Our next speaker is Tamara Kutsayeva, who is a scholar affiliated with the museum, the Fortress of Kiev. Since 2017, she's been studying Judaica collections that were neglected during Soviet times in Kiev museums and archives. Her remarks today are based on visual sources she identified from the archives of the National Academy of Sciences in Ukraine, Kiev. Her title is Tunisian Jewish History in Anthropological or Ethnographic Studies of Kavdir Hovk, Photographs of Nude Men and Women from the Scientific Archives of the Institute of Archaeology of the National Academy of Sciences, Ukraine. Please join me in welcoming her.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, it is a pleasure to see all of you here today. And I hopefully will successfully share my screen now to present what I have prepared. So first, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to participate in this conference to cover the topic, the additional topic that I started studying that allows me to slightly digress not only from my main research, but also from a trend that is pretty widespread in Ukraine when people are focusing on the national studies. And here we're gonna look at Judaics, and we're gonna look into something new that is not only focused on Ukrainian context. And while working in Ukrainian context, I found some sources that allowed me to look into the Jewish diaspora and the African continent in the late 19th century in Tunisia. And the second thing that also helped me to present during today's section is preserving the cultural heritage, because what I have found in the archives collected by Fedor Vovk, who spent over 10 years in forced exile in France trying to save his life to not be imprisoned by the imperial forces. These items have been digitized during the war in 2013 in the framework of the project that is dedicated to the digital memory storage by the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And this project dedicated to digitalization of Fedorovsk archive was overseen by Alexander Busko and Martin Rodet, who also helped us big time and helped with the logistic aspects. Fedorov's archive includes over 100,000 different items that he collected, but clearly couldn't process all of them. And in this archive, you can mostly find what is dedicated to Ukrainian socio-cultural anthropology. And in my opinion, he studied it in France as a physical or biological anthropologist, but ended it as a renowned socio-cultural anthropologist, a person who contributed to the idea of the anthropological time of the present-day Ukrainian. Judaics also took a very important place in his studies. He studied folk culture, and he also wanted to focus on Jews as one of the peoples who used to live in Ukraine. And there are about 100 visuals that I managed to discover. And among these 100 visual sources, maybe even more of them, there are 4 unexpected pictures that are basically shown as the inscription on the other side, say representatives of Tunisian Jews. And these pictures of naked people are helping us to travel to Northern Africa, to Tunisia, late 19th century, when it was the high time of anthropological studies. And in my today's presentation, I want to better understand the sources and these pictures that I'm currently sharing with you. So what can we mention? In these pictures that were captured by an unknown person, we can try and look into the symbolism of theirs. First and foremost, it is important to understand how come that Fedor Vovk, who never went to Africa, obtained these pictures. Maybe these pictures that don't mention anything about identity of the person aside from their physical and physiological appearance. One could try figuring out that these pictures were provided to Fedor Vovk by a renowned French zoologist after he traveled to Northern Africa in 1904. And up to this day, I'm still finding it hard to understand. These pictures were either taken accidentally, or maybe they were part of a larger archive collection of some anthropometric data to engage in a further study. This is still a puzzle, but these 4 pictures by Henri Neuville they present a lot of potential for further research. In 1883, Tunisia came under the protectorate of France, and this catapulted the Jewish community from the Berber and Arab periods to the modern era, which brought westernization, secularization, as well as a huge dramatic influence at traditional life that was changing it and transforming it. And the Jewish community of Tunisia, as one of the oldest Jewish diasporas in the world, with incredibly strong European roots, as the majority of Tunisian Jews, except the very local communities, originated from Spain and Portugal, and some came from Livorno in Italy. So this huge Jewish diaspora, very diverse, very powerful multicultural past, clearly drew attention of various researchers who started arriving to Tunisia from France to find out more about this community. It is worth noting that in parallel, it was the high time of anthropological research, since anthropology, the biological and physical science, started evolving at that time. Later, it will turn into social and cultural anthropology, but back then it was a simple biological science. And the French colonial empire published various postcards with types of Jewish people of Tunisia or Morocco that you can see at the bottom right corner. And these postcards are incredibly interesting, but they are a feature of colonial view, colonial perspective. Basically, their aim was to raise awareness of people living in the empire about their colonies. That is why we have to be very careful when working with this kind of imagery. Another thing worth noting is that different postcards that I have analyzed the image of the African woman, not only Jewish woman, oftentimes was somewhat exotic. I would even say erotic, half naked. And I believe that this is how representatives of the European civilization portraying predominantly non-white, non-traditional, if not primitive society in Africa. But it is also important to know that the half-naked body was never part of self-presentation of local communities, specifically in Africa. And that is why this is perception by the outsiders, by the Europeans. And talking about the Jewish woman and how she was perceived by the European civilization. It is worth noting that what we can see on the postcards, we can only see bare hands. They are not even half naked, as we could see in some other images. For example, the Bedouin women. What could be the reason? The Jewish women in Tunisia belonged to communities that came from Europe. That is why they could have not been presented to other Europeans in this exotic, half erotic way, because their cultural and historical identity was also rooted in Europe. And basically, it was impossible for the Europeans to depict other Europeans in an exotic way. That is why the image of a woman from Tunisia, from Northern Africa, was different compared to the Bedouins, who oftentimes would be depicted fully naked, but in a very artistic manner. Another thing that is worth noting is that the impact of the Berbers and Arabs on Jewish community in Tunisia centuries also left an imprint on the traditional dress, the body of the Jewish woman. Basically, any public nudity was impossible. And clearly, those who printed this kind of postcards, this kind of visual imagery also took that into account. Therefore, the pictures that I looked into in the framework of my research came from private sources, and they clearly were created for anthropological needs. They were not pieces of art, and they were not meant for public presentation.
Another peculiarity of this source is that for a current day scholar, and these photos are not self-sufficient. They are not accompanied by any text description. There are no descriptions not only of their nationality, but also the community. The Jewish community in Tunisia is very diverse. There are those who are from Livorno, there are those who come from Djerba. Therefore, from these photos, we can only discern the racial denomination of these people, their racial origin, but not their proper identity and the proper Jewish community they belong to. Therefore, they cannot be treated in a profound way by modern day anthropologists due to the lack of the explanation. Therefore, for us, they are just a symbol of the beginning of anthropological studies that were viewed persons as a silent subject for research. Basically, at the level of animals, as these photos were gifted to Vogue for his archive, and most people in Vogue's circle were either zoologists or biologists, and I believe that Vogue himself had undergone this transition from being anthropologist to becoming cultural anthropologist, social anthropologist. In these photos, if we use the comparative method, we can get more information about the Jewish community of Tunisia, and we have information about physicality. We can say that this woman, who will remain unknown, her voice will remain unknown to the history. But we may say that this woman, apart from feeling this natural shame while being photographed, she had to overcome the Jewish prohibitions when it comes to physicality of a woman. There are laws, Jewish laws, which are called Yeshud, and according to these laws, a woman is not allowed to be naked
Tamara,
next to a man who she's
Tamara,
not married to, and there is a requirement
Tamara.
that a special permit needs to be taken.
I'm so sorry, we're running out of time.
Am I? I just want to exemplify this statement, and I want to show you these photos so you can see the difference between the photos of at the end of the 19th century and modern day photos. Anthropology as a modern science has evolved immensely, and we saw that there was a change in research, and now we have more information from those photos that remain from the 19th century. At the end, I would like to say that if we take into consideration anthropological researches on the Ukrainian nation in any format were carried out by Ukrainian scholars in order to explore the self-identification of Ukrainians. In case of Jewish people, these researchers were carried out by scholars who didn't have Jewish origin. And we see that there are two completely different stories over here. On one hand, we got a lot of source materials that are important to human sciences. And on the other hand, we see that there is this scientific racism and the concept of racial inequality or Re- this is it from me. If you want to reach out, please, this is my email, and I would like to pass on to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Our final speaker is Dr. Oksana Smortseva, who is Associate Professor of the Department of Modern History of Ukraine, Faculty of History, Taras Shevchenko, Kyiv National University. Dr. Smortseva is author of more than 130 scientific, educational, and methodological encyclopedic reference and popular science works. Took part in more than 100 scientific conferences, forums, symposiums in Ukraine and abroad, and is member of the Educational and Methodological Commission of the Faculty of History at Taras Shevchenko KNU. Please welcome them.
Thank you, Jennifer, for giving me the floor. Since my presentation will conclude our panel, I will try to be as concise as possible. I do understand that we are all a bit tired by now. It is almost 9 p.m. here in Ukraine. Today, I would like to explore the topic of postmodernism in Ukraine religious architecture. Architecture is a reflection of certain socio-cultural changes. One of the stages of such changes was postmodernism in various spheres of human existence. It spread as one of the types of worldview, as cultural practices, as even politics. Interpretations of postmodernism, its chronological framework, its pros and cons, are often blurred as postmodernism itself, with its pluralism, tolerance, acceptance of the other. Paraphrasing the famous Socrates is my friend, but the truth is more important. Postmodernism offers another formula. Socrates is my friend, therefore his truth also has the right to exist. Postmodernist architects sought to understand architecture as a work of human imagination and combined this human imagination with the most modern engineering technological achievements. It is based on rich historical experience of decorations, cultural additions, achievements of Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, and Classicism. We can describe postmodern architecture in a different way, but we cannot call it boring or conservative, although I heard a lot that it is hard to grasp. In Ukraine, we have a number of beautiful sacred buildings, and in the world globally, the places of worship that could host up to a few thousands of visitors are the biggest examples of religious architecture. For instance, there is a crystal a cathedral in California in the US. It was built at the end of the 1970s, 1980s, and it used to be part of the Reformers Church in the US. Due to bankruptcy, it was sold to the Roman Catholic Church. The interior of this cathedral was changed according to the requirements of Catholic Church, and this cathedral has the biggest musical instrument that is the an particular example of the musical instrument. And now I would like to give you an example of an Indian temple. This is an amazing Buddhist temple, and this is a temple that it has a pagoda, and it is made without nails. And this temple also hosts a center for Buddhist studies and arts. Speaking about the example of Ukraine, we have a number of postmodern buildings. I believe that the most striking example is the Patriarchal Cathedral of the Resurrection of Christ. It is located on the left bank of the Dnipro River. Unfortunately, that building was damaged due to the shock wave after the explosion. I know that the windows were broken in that building. Unfortunately, we sustain various losses in Ukraine. People suffer, animals suffer, and also buildings are damaged. The architect of this cathedral is Mykola Levchuk, and he is also author of The Flowers of Ukraine, another example. Another gem of postmodern architecture is located in Lviv. This is the Church of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And this structure was designed by architect Radoslav Zhuk. The construction was carried out during 1995 2000, and this cathedral was famous for the fact that it was consecrated by Lubomir Huzer at a certain point in time. And in June 2001, Pope John Paul II, who was in Ukraine with his official visit, met with young people in the square near this cathedral. This church is considered to be one of the most beautiful examples of modern religious architecture. Another building I would like to mention is the Golden Rose building. That is the building that also hosts a synagogue. It is a postmodern building. And there are other places of worship in modernism style in Kiev. They are mostly located on the left bank, and they were built in the 1970s and 1980s. Being a historian, I'm interested not only in analyzing the religious architecture in Ukraine, but I'm also interested in exploring postmodern art, religious architecture as part of the cityscape. And since 2010, we started hearing the term metamodern, and it means that there is some oscillation between uh, modern and postmodern, and sometimes they are used simultaneously. But is postmodernism really over? especially if we talk about the the war in Ukraine, the Russian-Ukrainian war. It is the war that is waged not only on the battlefield, but also as a hybrid warfare. There is this war for the minds of people. This is the war that engages with the minds of people, and that is also driven by propaganda, among other tools. And this paradigm also brings us to the plurality of truth, this postmodern approach. We see that the past decade was full of events, and therefore there is a reflection on the impact of modernism on the religious buildings. It is important to understand what is the value of such architecture, as in Great Britain, postmodern architecture and buildings in this style are considered as a cultural heritage. Therefore, we also need to carry out proper researches and pay attention to it, since we see that sometimes it is overlooked. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Oksana. And finally, we have a few minutes for our discussant, Paulina Karchenko of the National Humanities of Arts in Ukraine.
Greetings, everyone. I would like to thank organizers for this meaningful and instructive panel. I believe that the presentations were very interesting. And just to be brief, summarizing all these presentations that were very different, but still relevant in terms of the change of the function of art that we observe today. As in the territory of Europe, we see that the situation has changed, and there are different trends that are fascinating for the global growth. For instance, the internet and digital technologies and their advancements. And yet, we have to tackle the war, and this phenomenon could not and does have an impact on art. Therefore, I have a question to all the panelists. Are there any risks that art will lose one of its key functions, the aesthetic function? And do you expect the shift from the aesthetic paradigm to socio-political strategy? Do you expect art to assume a greater socio-political role instead of an aesthetic one? Thank you. Oksana, please go ahead. Well, yes, indeed. The modern art, well, it actually first and foremost responds to social issues and creates social messages. I believe that there are certain risks to it. The 20th century itself completely changed our perception of aesthetics. For instance, no, the aesthetics of the ugly. The aesthetics became much broader than in the previous centuries, as now we believe that everything has aesthetic value. Therefore, art will fulfill its aesthetic function, will have this function, but it will also have a propaganda function, social function, political function. Maybe the emphasis will change, the limits of art will change. Thank you, Oksana. Asmati, over to you.
Thank you for this good question. I believe that this balance between autonomy and aesthetical autonomy of the art and its engagement into social, cultural, and social political context is slightly imbalanced, but this is natural because art cannot exist outside of context. It cannot be separated from what is happening in a country or what is happening with a nation. So I believe that the balance will come back in case the war is over, in case there are no new crises, something similar to the pandemic. I believe that this is gonna help us strike this balance and bring it back. Thank you so much. Thank you, Asmati. And once again, I would like to thank you for so many substantial presentations. There are so many questions that are yet to be researched. For example, the ones that are dedicated to perception of the artist and what needs to be done by the professionals. But I believe that this is a topic for the next discussion and for more research. Thank you so much. And I would like to give the floor back to Jennifer. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that Jennifer has already disconnected since she had to leave. And we have a few more minutes. Maybe somebody else would like to share some final thoughts to make a quick comment. We can only thank you. As my former student says, thank you for this pleasure of highly intellectual conversation. Thank you, Oksana. Well, I believe that the first day of the conference was very successful. I'd like to thank all the participants who are here with us today. Thank you for amazing presentations, roundtables, sessions, for very interesting, thought-provoking discussions, and thank you for joining us today.